You don't lose women when they stop caring. You lose them when they start caring, and you don't know how to handle it. That moment she reacts emotionally over something small, that wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the beginning of attachment. But most men don't recognize it. They feel pressure. They rush to explain themselves. They trade emotional stability for approval. And the dynamic collapses quietly. There's a specific emotional signal women give once they're invested, and it tells you exactly where you stand. If you miss it, you'll spend the rest of the relationship chasing balance instead of holding it. And you'll never understand how you went from having leverage to having none at all. This video isn't about dating tricks or emotional games. It's about awareness, the kind most men never develop until they've already lost control of the dynamic. If you've ever felt confused when a woman reacted emotionally and you didn't know whether to lean in or pull back, that's exactly what we're about to break down. You're going to learn how to read that moment correctly, why most men respond the wrong way, and how to stop handing away leverage without realizing it. If you've ever been in this situation, hit like. And if you want to understand female psychology at a level most men never reach, make sure you subscribe. And what comes next will change how you see these moments forever. Most men don't lose women in dramatic breakups or explosive arguments. They lose them in quiet moments they completely misunderstand. It usually starts small. She's suddenly irritated about a text you didn't send fast enough. She goes cold for no clear reason. She makes a sharp comment that feels unnecessary, almost childish. And immediately, your mind goes into damage control mode. What did I do wrong? How do I fix this? Did I mess things up? That reaction is automatic for most men. You're wired to restore calm, to smooth things over, to bring the situation back to neutral as fast as possible. So you reach out. You explain yourself. You apologize for things you didn't even do intentionally. You lower your position just to make the tension stop. But here's what no one tells you. Not every negative emotional reaction means she's losing interest. In fact, some reactions only appear once she already cares. A woman who feels nothing doesn't react. She doesn't get bothered. She doesn't get moody. She doesn't throw comments or pull back to see if you'll notice. She stays neutral, detached, quiet. That's the part most men miss. When her mood starts changing based on your behavior, even when you didn't do anything extreme, that's not indifference. That's emotional involvement. That's her internal balance being affected by you. And instead of recognizing that moment for what it is, most men panic. They treat it like a warning sign instead of a signal of investment. They rush in to fix something that didn't need fixing. They turn a position of quiet leverage into a position of emotional submission. This is the invisible moment where the dynamic flips. Not against you, but toward you. And most men step right out of it without ever knowing they had the advantage. Indifference is quiet. Emotional reactions are loud. That distinction changes everything. Men are trained from a young age to believe that emotional tension means something is wrong, and that it's their job to fix it. If someone is upset, you smooth it over. If there's conflict, you resolve it. If emotions rise, you de-escalate. That mindset works in business. It works in friendships. It even works in crisis situations. But in male-female dynamics, that instinct often puts you in the weakest position possible. Because the moment a woman reacts emotionally, most men assume they've failed some invisible test. They rush to restore harmony, not realizing that harmony is not what creates attraction or respect. Emotional certainty does. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Women don't react strongly to men they don't care about. They don't get irritated by someone irrelevant. They don't feel disappointed by someone who doesn't matter. They don't feel emotional friction with a man who holds no weight in their inner world. Indifference doesn't create tension. Attachment does. But instead of seeing her reaction as proof that you've crossed a value threshold, most men interpret it as a warning sign. So they lean forward emotionally. They over-explain their intentions. They apologize to calm her feelings. And without realizing it, they reposition themselves beneath her emotional state. That's where the power shift happens. And it's self-inflicted. When you rush to fix her emotions, you silently communicate one thing. Her emotional stability now controls your behavior. And once that pattern is set, she doesn't need to ask for more control. It's already there. This is why so many men feel confused. They were confident. Things were flowing. Then she reacted, and suddenly they're chasing the version of her that existed before emotions entered the picture. But that version of her was neutral, not invested, not attached. The reaction wasn't a step backward, it was a step deeper. She wasn't reacting because you failed. She was reacting because you mattered. And the moment you understand that, you stop trying to earn back something you never lost, and start holding a position most men give away the second it appears. Here's where we need to slow down and get precise, because this is the psychological core most men never fully understand. A woman's emotional reaction is not random. It's not chaos. And it's definitely not a sign that you suddenly lost value overnight. When her emotions start shifting because of something small you did or didn't do, it means one thing. You've crossed an internal threshold. You now matter enough to affect her emotional state. That doesn't happen casually. Before that point, your actions are just information. She notices, but she doesn't feel. You text late? Neutral. You're busy? Neutral. You don't compliment her? Neutral. But once she's emotionally invested, those same actions stop being neutral. They start creating friction inside her. Her ego gets involved. Expectations form, often without her consciously deciding to create them. And that's the part most men misunderstand. She's not reacting because she's trying to control you. She's reacting because her internal balance was disrupted. Her emotions are responding before her logic can catch up. This is why you'll often hear women say things like, "I don't even know why that bothered me." That statement is honest. At this stage, she hasn't fully processed why she cares, only that she does. And that's what emotional investment looks like in real time. Here's the critical distinction most men never make. A reaction is not the same as control. A reaction is vulnerability. It means she's exposed enough for your behavior to matter. It means she's already placed you inside her emotional world, even if she hasn't admitted it to herself yet. But this is also the most fragile moment in the dynamic, because when a man senses her attachment, fear often takes over. Fear of losing her, fear of messing it up, fear of not being enough. So he tries to stabilize the situation by overcorrecting, and that's where the damage happens. Instead of letting the emotional imbalance settle naturally, he rushes in to reassure, explain, and soften everything, unintentionally training her that emotional reactions move him. That's why this moment matters so much. Handled correctly, her reaction deepens attraction and respect. Handled incorrectly, it teaches her that emotional pressure gives her leverage. The reaction itself isn't the danger. Your response to it is. And the men who lose control at this stage don't lose her because she reacted. They lose her because they didn't understand what the reaction actually meant. If you want real clarity in dating dynamics, you need to understand this contrast, because it's sharper than most men are willing to admit. A woman who doesn't care is easy to deal with. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't react. She doesn't read into anything you do. You can disappear for a day. Nothing changes. You can be distant. Nothing shifts. Your presence or absence barely registers. That's indifference. And most men confuse that calm neutrality with things going well, because there's no friction, no tension, no emotion to manage. But that calm isn't peace. It's emptiness. Now compare that to a woman who is attached. Her mood changes based on your behavior. She notices your tone. She feels distance instead of just observing it. Sometimes she goes quiet, not because she doesn't care, but because she cares too much and doesn't want to expose it. Sometimes she says something sharp, not to hurt you, but to test whether you're still present, whether you notice, whether you respond. This is where men get it backwards. They fear emotional reactions and feel relieved by emotional silence. But emotional silence isn't stability. It's detachment. When a woman stops reacting altogether, that's when you should be concerned. That's when expectations are gone. That's when emotional investment has already started withdrawing. Emotion is friction, but friction only exists when there's contact. No contact, no reaction. So when she reacts, when her mood shifts, when her words carry emotional weight, it's not chaos. It's evidence of connection. It's proof that you're no longer optional in her emotional world. The mistake men make is trying to eliminate that friction instead of understanding it. They aim for no emotion instead of emotional control. They want things to feel easy instead of meaningful. And in doing so, they accidentally train women to emotionally disengage, because disengagement is calm, predictable, and safe. But it's also the end. You don't lose a woman when she's emotional. You lose her when she feels nothing. And once you truly understand that difference, you stop fearing her reactions and start recognizing them for what they really are. Let me ground this in something real, because this is where most men finally recognize themselves. A man I spoke to had been seeing a woman consistently. Nothing dramatic. No games, no pressure. Things felt smooth. Then one night, he didn't reply to her message, not to create distance, not to make a point. He was genuinely busy. No explanation sent, no follow-up text. He handled his night and went to sleep. The next morning his phone was full. Not anger, not rage, just tension. A short message, slightly passive, emotionally loaded. Something along the lines of, "Guess I'm not that important anymore." Now pause here, because this is the exact moment most men ruin everything. They rush to explain. They apologize repeatedly. They overcorrect just to smooth things out. He didn't. He replied calmly, briefly, without urgency. "I was tied up last night. You okay?" No defensiveness, no emotional weight, no attempt to soothe her insecurity. And something interesting happened. Her tone shifted almost immediately. The edge disappeared. The distance softened. She started explaining herself instead. She told him she didn't know why she reacted that way. She admitted she felt insecure for a moment. She even apologized for projecting that emotion onto him. That's when the dynamic revealed itself. He didn't win because of what he said. He won because of how little he needed to say. His presence stayed steady while her emotions moved. And that stability created contrast. When a man doesn't collapse under emotional pressure, a woman is forced to regulate herself. She becomes aware of her own reaction. She reconnects with the reason she felt exposed in the first place. That moment wasn't about texting etiquette. It wasn't about timing or strategy. It was about power without force. He didn't try to control her emotions. He didn't try to escape them either. He simply stayed grounded and let her come back on her own. This is what most men miss. The strongest position isn't dominance. It's presence. And when a woman folds emotionally, it's not because she was pushed. It's because she felt safe enough to step forward. This is where most men lose control, not because she pulled away, but because they collapsed. The advantage was already there. The emotional investment had already formed. But instead of holding their position, they panic. And panic always looks the same. They apologize too fast and too much. They send long messages explaining themselves. They overtext, trying to reset the mood back to how it was. All of it comes from the same place. Fear. Fear of tension. Fear of losing her. Fear of not being enough anymore. So they try to calm her emotions at any cost. But here's what that behavior actually communicates. Even if you never say it out loud, it tells her that her emotional state now controls you. The moment you rush to smooth things over, you hand her leverage. You teach her, subconsciously, that emotional pressure moves your behavior. That discomfort makes you bend. That insecurity gives her influence. And once that lesson is learned, the dynamic never feels the same again. This is why men often say, "She changed after that." No, the dynamic changed, because now she knows she doesn't need to meet you emotionally. You'll meet her instead. She doesn't need to regulate herself. You'll regulate yourself for her. And attraction doesn't survive there. Not because women are cruel, but because emotional safety doesn't come from control. It comes from stability. A man who over-apologizes isn't showing care. He's showing that he can be shaken. A man who over-explains isn't being honest. He's being reactive. And a man who over-texts isn't being attentive. He's chasing emotional permission. That's the quiet collapse most men never notice. They didn't lose her because she reacted. They lost her because they taught her that reacting gives her power. The moment you try to calm her emotions, you tell her she controls you. And once that message is sent, it's very hard to take it back. This is where control is either established or lost permanently. Not through dominance, not through silence, but through emotional steadiness. When she reacts, most men feel an internal pull to do something, to respond fast, to clarify, to soften the moment. But the strongest move isn't action, it's restraint. Holding your position doesn't mean ignoring her. It doesn't mean punishing her with silence. And it definitely doesn't mean acting cold or detached. It means you don't let her emotional wave knock you off center. You stay calm. You stay grounded. You remove urgency from your voice, your words, and your timing. When you speak slowly, clearly, without emotional charge. Not to fix her mood, but to acknowledge the moment without submitting to it. Something simple, neutral, observant. You don't usually get like this, something on your mind. No accusation, no apology, no defense. That kind of response does something powerful. It doesn't reward emotional pressure. And it doesn't reject her emotions either. It puts responsibility back where it belongs. When a woman doesn't get an immediate emotional payoff, reassurance, panic, submission, she's forced to regulate herself. She becomes aware of her own reaction. She reconnects with the fact that she is the one feeling exposed. And that's when balance returns. Not because you pushed it, but because you didn't chase it. This is why certainty is so important. Certainty tells her you're not shaken. Certainty tells her you're not afraid. Certainty tells her you don't need her emotional approval to stay grounded. And that creates safety, real safety. Not the kind that comes from control. The kind that comes from knowing you won't collapse under pressure. A man who stays emotionally steady becomes the anchor in the dynamic. And once that role is established, her reactions stop being weapons. They become signals. Signals you can read without reacting. Signals that tell you exactly where you stand. Certainty is the strongest emotional stabilizer. And when you hold it, the dynamic naturally settles in your favor. What most men don't realize is that having the advantage in a moment is easy. Keeping it is where identity shows. A single emotional reaction from her doesn't mean you suddenly won. It means you were briefly placed in a position where your response mattered more than your words. And that position can either turn into long-term control or disappear just as fast as it showed up. The difference comes down to one thing. Who needs who more to feel steady? A man loses long-term leverage the moment he starts needing clarity, reassurance, or emotional validation from her reactions. The moment he needs to be understood immediately. The moment he needs to prove that he's good enough so the tension will stop. That need erodes presence. Long-term control isn't about staying distant or withholding emotion. It's about not needing to convince. Not needing to chase emotional certainty. not needing to rush resolution just to feel safe again. When you're grounded in yourself, her emotions don't threaten you. They inform you. You don't overcorrect. You don't panic. You don't try to lock her in. And ironically, that's what keeps her there. A woman feels safest and most drawn to a man who doesn't fear losing her. Not because he's careless, but because his center isn't dependent on her moods. His calm doesn't fluctuate with her reactions. His identity doesn't shrink when tension appears. That's the shift from momentary power to mastery. You stop reacting to the dynamic and start shaping it simply by who you are in it. And once that happens, something subtle changes. She becomes more careful with your presence, more aware of your absence, more invested in maintaining connection, because she feels what it's like when you don't move emotionally. When you're no longer afraid to lose her, she becomes afraid to lose you. That's not manipulation. That's emotional independence, and it's the foundation of real control. What you need to understand and remember is this. A woman's emotional reaction is not a failure on your part. It's not a signal that you're losing her. It's proof that you already matter more than you think. Most men don't lose women because attraction fades. They lose them because they panic at the exact moment attraction deepens. They mistake emotional friction for rejection. They mistake tension for danger. And in trying to eliminate discomfort, they eliminate their own leverage. The real mistake was never losing her. It was destroying the advantage they already had. When you understand this, everything shifts. You stop chasing clarity. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop trying to stabilize emotions that aren't yours to manage. A man who controls his emotional responses controls the dynamic, not by force, not by manipulation, but by presence. When you don't collapse under pressure, pressure stops being a weapon. When you don't fear her reactions, they stop controlling you. And when you no longer need to hold on tightly, she starts holding on instead. This is the level most men never reach, not because it's complicated, but because it requires emotional discipline. If this perspective changed the way you see past situations, hit like. If you want to keep developing the kind of clarity and control most men never learn, make sure you subscribe. And if you've ever experienced that moment where she reacted and you didn't understand why, drop a comment, because now you do. This isn't about winning her, it's about mastering yourself. And once you do that, the dynamic takes care of itself.